All right, let's jump right in. We're looking at a really fascinating Supreme Court of India case today. Gian Chand Garg versus Harpal Singh. It kind of makes you rethink what a criminal act actually means, especially, when money is involved. This deep dive, it started with a simple bounce check, but the real story is, well, how the law tries to balance punishment with just resolving the problem. Our mission today is to understand how an offense under India's Negotiable Instruments Act, let's just call it the NI Act, how that can be seen more like a civil wrong, and what happens when folks decide to compromise, even really late in the process.
Yeah, what's fascinating here truly is seeing how the legal system handles these financial disputes, especially in the commercial world. When a check bounces, it sets off this whole chain of legal events. And this case, it perfectly illustrates that critical balancing act. The system has, the teeth of criminal law, but often the real goal is just making things right financially, getting the money sorted. We're looking at what people often call a civil sheep in criminal wolf's clothing.
That's a great image. So in this specific case, the conviction for the bounce check, it bounced around quite a bit itself. First affirmed by a local court, then a higher state court, then the Punjab and Haryana High Court too. But then the Supreme Court just quashed it completely. Yeah. Can you quickly explain what quashed means and maybe how it moved through those levels?
Absolutely. Yeah, quashed just means the Supreme Court essentially said no. Overturned it, voided those previous judgments, effectively saying the whole criminal thing should stop. Think of the Indian courts like a ladder, right? Yeah. You start locally, maybe a magistrate's court, disagree. You appeal up, district court, then the state's high court. And if there's a big legal question, like here, it can go all the way to the top of the Supreme Court. The fact that they stepped in after all those lower courts agreed, well, that tells you something fundamental was at stake.
And that fundamental thing was the compromise, right? The settlement. And this happened after the High Court had already ruled, which seems pretty significant. The original complainant, they got payments, 5 lakh rupees, that's about 60,000 US dollars, roughly through demand drafts. And then another 3 lakh rupees were promised later. So the question is, when the money changes hands like that, does the crime just sort of fade away?
Precisely. And this case, it strongly echoes what the Supreme Court has said before, in other key judgments. Cases like Mismi's Meters and Instruments and P. Mohan Raj, they established this principle pretty clearly. These rulings basically say that offenses under Section 138 of the NI Act, the bounce check section, while they do have criminal consequences like jail time or fines, their core nature is primarily civil. The criminal part is kind of a lever.
A lever, a really strong legal nudge maybe, not really about branding someone a lifelong criminal.
Exactly. A nudge, a strong push towards honoring financial promises. The court stressed that these matters are compoundable at any stage. And that's a really key term for you listening, compoundable. It just means the people involved in certain offenses, like this one, can agree to settle it themselves, out of court. Once they agree, when the plaintiff says, okay, I'm satisfied, I've been paid, the criminal case can actually be dropped. It puts restitution, making the victim whole, ahead of pure punishment, especially when the victim is made whole. The court specifically mentioned once a complainant accepts that money as full and final settlement, the Section 138 proceedings. They lose their footing. The criminal wolf kind of backs off because the civil sheep, well, it's been taken care of.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's still a huge shift from what you might expect from a criminal conviction, right? You could argue, though, doesn't that undermine the whole deterrent idea of criminal law? If you can settle even after multiple courts say guilty, does it make the offense seem less serious?
That's a really fair point, a valid concern. But the court's thinking, its rationale, is that the main goal of the NI Act isn't just punishment. It's about making sure commercial transactions are credible. That checks, these instruments, actually work. So if a compromise makes the injured party whole, resolves the dispute efficiently, saves court time, it actually serves that bigger goal of commercial justice. It builds trust, knowing there's a path to resolution if things go wrong. It's focused on justice between the parties, not just, abstract punishment from the state.
Right. So wrapping this up then, what does this all mean for us, for you listening? We've seen a criminal conviction for a bounce check confirmed multiple times ultimately get wiped away by the Supreme Court. Why? Because of a voluntary compromise involving significant payments. It really highlights a unique, kind of powerful aspect of the law here.
And connecting it to the bigger picture, this case hammers home that Section 138 offenses are, at their heart, civil matters. The court couldn't be clearer. They are compoundable anytime, even post-conviction if there's a genuine settlement. It just reinforces that idea. The criminal angle is often a tool, a means to an end. That end being financial accountability, making settlement happen, not necessarily just locking someone up.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, something for you to think about. When parties settle a case like this with money paid back, what is the legal system really prioritizing? Is it justice through punishment? Or is it justice through restitution, through making things right and keeping business flowing? How does understanding that balance maybe shift your own perspective on these kinds of commercial disputes and the really important role compromise can play? Worth mulling over.